Day my catering company landed a $2.3 million contract with the Hargrove Hotel Group, my mother-in-law stood up at Sunday dinner and told me to shut it down. Not scale back. Not hand it over. Shut it down. She set her fork down on her plate with this deliberate little clink, the kind she always did when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. And she looked at my husband first, not me, and said, "This has gone on long enough. She needs to decide what she is. A wife and mother, or whatever this is." Whatever this is. I had just signed the biggest contract of my life 48 hours earlier. My hands were still shaking from it. I need to back up because you won't understand the full weight of that dinner if I don't tell you where I started. My name is Adeline. I'm from a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. My dad worked at a distribution warehouse for 22 years, and my mom cleaned houses on weekends to cover my sister's braces. We weren't poor. We were the kind of family that was always one bad month away from it. So when I got a partial scholarship to culinary school in Chicago, I treated it like oxygen. I worked the overnight pastry shift at a hotel bakery 6 days a week while I was in school. I graduated with calluses on my hands and $31,000 in student debt, and not a single regret. I met my husband, I'll call him by his initial, C, at a friend's engagement party. He was charming in that easy way that certain men are. The kind of charm that doesn't cost them anything. He laughed at everything I said. He asked me real questions. 3 years later, we were married in a garden venue outside Nashville, and I genuinely believed we wanted the same things. His family had money, not obscene money, but the comfortable, accumulated kind. His father had built a regional insurance company from scratch, and his mother, Harriet, had spent 30 years being the social infrastructure of that success. She organized the charity galas. She knew the mayor by his first name. She had opinions about tablecloths. She also had opinions about me. Not at first. At first, I was refreshing. I heard that word a lot in the early years. Adeline is so refreshing. What they meant was, she's not from here. She doesn't know the rules yet. Give her time. They assumed I would grow into the shape they had already carved out. Volunteer at the right organizations. Join the junior league. Appear at Seaside at his father's company events and say gracious things about the hors d'oeuvres. Instead, I opened a catering company out of a shared commercial kitchen in East Nashville. I called it Hearth and Thread, just me and my friend Bex, who had been a line cook at 3 different restaurants and had the scar on her forearm to prove it. We started with small events, baby showers, corporate lunches, a few wedding rehearsal dinners. I made everything from scratch. Bex handled logistics. We charged fair prices and over-delivered on every single one. By year 2, we had a wait list. By year 3, we had hired 4 people and moved into our own kitchen space on Dickerson Pike. By year 4, I was being approached by the Hargrove Hotel Group, a regional hospitality company with 11 properties across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia, about an exclusive catering partnership for their event spaces. The contract was worth $2.3 million over 3 years. It would require us to scale, hire, and systematize. It was the moment every small business owner dreams about and also fears deeply because it means nothing will ever be small again. I signed it on a Thursday. That Sunday, we had dinner at my in-laws' house. I should have known something was off when I walked in and Cee's sister, I'll call her Reese Cease, was already there. Reese lived 45 minutes away and almost never came to Sunday dinners. She had 2 kids under 4 and usually had an excuse. That evening, she was sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of white wine, watching me the way people watch a storm come in from a window. My father-in-law, Gerald, was at the grill on the back porch. He waved at me with the tongs. Gerald was a decent man, mostly. He stayed out of things he considered household matters, which was a polite way of saying he let Harriet run everything inside the walls and he focused on what was outside them. Dinner was quiet for the first 20 minutes. I talked about the contract. I was excited. I couldn't help it. I told them about the properties, the event calendar, the kind of volume we'd be working with. C nodded along. He'd heard most of it already, but he looked proud. Or I thought he did. Harriet asked how many hours a week I would be working. I said honestly, probably 60 to start until we got the systems built out. She set her fork down. "See," she said, "your daughter hasn't seen you for 3 weekends in a row." Our daughter Ren was 2 years old. She was at home with a babysitter that night because we'd thought it would be a nice, quiet grown-up dinner. Mom, C said, in the tone he used when he wanted her to stop but wasn't going to actually make her stop. I'm serious. I've been patient. I supported this little project from the beginning. Little project. But there's a point where it becomes irresponsible. Ren needs her mother present. C needs a partner, not a, she gestured vaguely at the air, an employee of herself. Reese was studying her wine glass. I put my fork down too. Harriet, I just signed a contract that is going to… I know what you signed. She looked at me directly for the first time all evening. And I'm telling you, as a woman who has raised a family and supported a successful man through building something real, this is the part where you choose. You can chase this or you can be here. You cannot do both. And frankly, Adeline, I think you know that. C said nothing. Gerald said nothing. Reese topped off her wine. The table was completely still. I sat there for 5 seconds that felt like a full minute, and then I said very quietly, I'm going to need a moment. And I went to the bathroom and stood over the sink and breathed. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to ask you something real quick. What time is it where you're watching, and what city are you in? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing where you're finding this. I came back to the table. I finished my dinner. I smiled at the right moments. I helped clear the plates. On the drive home, I asked C what he thought. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I already knew. I think she has a point, he finally said. I think we need to talk about what sustainable actually looks like for us. As a family. I looked out the window at the highway lights going by. You could have said something. I didn't want to make it a scene. She was making it a scene. Adeline. He said my name like a period at the end of a sentence. I think maybe this Hargrove thing is too big. Maybe it's not the right time. I turned to look at him. 3 years ago, you told me to go for it. 2 years ago, you said you were proud of me. Last year, you brought your whole office to our launch dinner. What changed? He didn't answer. Not really. What changed was the number. When it was a small catering company, it was a cute thing Adeline does. When it became a 7-figure contract, it became a threat to an order that nobody had ever explicitly named, but everyone had agreed to. I understood that. Sitting in that car, more clearly than I ever had before. The following 3 weeks were the worst of my marriage and some of the hardest of my life. C and I had versions of the same argument 6 different times. He wasn't cruel. That would have been easier in some ways. He was reasonable. He said things like, I just want us to be realistic, and I'm not asking you to quit. I'm asking you to scale back. And Ren is only this age once. Every sentence was designed to sound like concern and land like a wall. Harriet called me twice. The first time I let it go to voicemail. She left a 4-minute message that was framed as an offer. She would help more with Ren if I made some adjustments at work. The second time I picked up, she said very calmly that she had spoken to C's father about whether the family might consider offering me a buyout for Hearth and Thread, a fair market value, she said, for the business, so I could focus on what matters. I said, I'll think about it. I didn't sleep that night. I called Bex the next morning. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which she almost never does, which is how I knew she understood the seriousness. When I finished, she said, So what are you going to do? I said, I have no idea. She said, Yes, you do. She was right. I'd known for a while that the business needed to be properly protected. Trademarks, contracts, IP. A lawyer I'd met at a Chamber of Commerce event, a sharp woman named Philippa, had been telling me for 2 years that I needed to formalize everything. My proprietary recipes, my client relationship protocols, the operational systems Bex and I had built. I put it off the way you put off things that feel bureaucratic when you're busy doing the actual work. I called Philippa on a Tuesday morning and told her I needed to move fast. By the end of that week, I had filed for trademark protection on the Hearth and Thread name and brand. I had formally assigned intellectual property rights to myself as sole owner. I had documented every system, Every vendor relationship, every client contract. I restructured the business entity so that it was ironclad. No spouse, no family member, no outside party could touch it without my explicit consent. I also, quietly, carefully, without saying a word to C or Harriet or anyone in that family, had a conversation with the Hargrove Group's point of contact. A patient, professional man named Douglas, and told him I was going through some operational restructuring and needed to confirm the contract was secure. He confirmed it was. He also told me, unprompted, that they had chosen Hearth and Thread specifically because of me, my vision, my standards, my track record. Not a company. A person. That mattered more than I can explain. It was Reese, actually, who broke something open for me. She called about 2 weeks after that dinner. I almost didn't pick up. But something made me. She was quiet for a moment after I said hello, and then she said, "I owe you an apology for sitting there and saying nothing." I didn't respond right away. "I know what that felt like," she said, "because I did the same thing. When I was finishing my MBA, Mom made the same speech at the same table. I chose to stay home. I told myself it was a choice. But nobody gave me the option to do both. They just made one option look impossible until I stopped wanting it. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why, I just did. I sat down and put my back against the cabinet. "I'm not telling you what to do," Reese said. "I just wanted you to know that I see it. And I'm sorry." We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation I'd had in months. I did not shut down my business. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next was not a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a moment where I stood up at a dinner table and delivered a monologue. Real life doesn't usually work that way. What happened was quieter and harder and, ultimately, more permanent. I told C that I was not restructuring Hearth and Thread. I was not scaling back. I was not accepting a buyout. I was honoring my contract with the Hargrove Group. I was growing my company, and I was doing it as Ren's mother and as his wife. And if that wasn't the life he had signed up for, then we needed to have a very different conversation. He looked at me for a long time. "My mom is just trying to—" "I know what your mom is trying to do," I said. "I'm asking what you want." Another long silence. "I want my family to be okay," he said. "Then act like it," I said. It took time, a lot of it. C and I went to couples therapy for 4 months, which was uncomfortable and necessary and something neither of us had expected to need. He started to understand, slowly, how much of what he called concern had actually been inherited instruction. His therapist, not ours, his own, described it as differentiation. Learning to know where your family's voice ends and your own begins. Harriet and I reached a cold but functional peace. She stopped making speeches at the dinner table. I stopped trying to make her proud. We exist in the same rooms without incident, which is not warmth, but it is survivable. Gerald, at a Christmas party about 8 months later, called me aside by the dessert table. He was holding a small plate of the gingerbread I'd made, and he looked at it, and then he looked at me, and he said, "This is remarkable. You're remarkable." I should have said something. I thanked him. I meant it. Hearth and Thread's first year with the Hargrove Group generated $780,000 in revenue for our company. We hired 11 people. We opened a second kitchen facility in Brentwood. Bex became COO, which she pretended to be casual about and then cried a little in the parking lot afterward, which I pretended not to see. I got a text from a woman I'd catered a fundraising luncheon for. She sat on the board of a regional women's business association. She asked if I would consider speaking at their annual conference. I said yes. I stood at a podium in front of 240 women, and I told them about building something from a shared commercial kitchen, about the Hargrove contract, about learning to protect your work before someone else decides it belongs to them. I didn't tell them about the dinner table, not in detail. But I said this: the people who love you are not always the people who believe in you. Sometimes the most important thing you'll ever do is refuse to let those two categories decide each other's fate. I got a standing ovation. I didn't expect it. My face went hot. Backstage, I called Bex. She said, "Oh, good, you didn't pass out." I said, "I almost did." We laughed until my voice echoed in the green room. Last spring, Ren turned 4. We had a birthday party at the house, a proper one, with a butterfly theme because she'd been obsessed with butterflies since she found one on the back porch and decided it was her friend. I made a 2-tiered lemon cake with pressed edible flowers on the fondant. It took me most of the night before. C carried her out to see it in the morning before the guests arrived, and she stood in front of it in her pajamas with her mouth open. Then she looked at me and said with full seriousness, "Mama, you made that?" I said, "I did." She said, "How?" I said, "I practiced for a long time." She nodded, very slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere important. My mother-in-law arrived an hour later with a gift bag and a fruit platter. We said hello. I thanked her for coming. I poured her a cup of coffee. We stood in the kitchen together for a few minutes without the weight of the old argument between us. Not because it was resolved exactly, but because some things stop needing resolution once they simply stop being relevant. She looked at the cake on the counter. "You made that," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I did," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's beautiful." It was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. I decided it was enough. I think about that dinner sometimes. The fork on the plate, the silence from C's side of the table, the word refreshing, and how long it took me to understand it as a warning. I think about Reese on her kitchen floor in her MBA program, making a calculation she thought was her own. I think about Philippa in her office going through my trademark filings, pen in hand, making things permanent. I think about Douglas from the Hargrove Group saying we chose you, not the company. You. Here's the thing nobody tells you about standing your ground. It doesn't feel like strength in the moment. In the moment, it feels like grief. You're grieving the version of things where everyone is on your side, where you don't have to choose, where love is uncomplicated and rooms are warm. That version is real, it just isn't always available. What's available if you're willing to stay in the discomfort long enough is something sturdier. My future was always mine to write. I just had to stop waiting for permission to pick up the pen. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever been at a table where someone tried to make you smaller, drop a comment below. I read every single one. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to earn something. Not in the obvious way, hours worked, money made, contracts signed. I mean in the deeper sense. When Harriet set that fork down and told me to choose, she believed she was offering me clarity. And in a way, she was, just not the kind she intended. What she showed me, what that whole dinner showed me, is that people who have never had to build anything from nothing will always underestimate what building costs. She had supported Gerald's company by standing beside it. That was real, and it mattered. But it made her believe that support was the highest form of contribution a woman could make. And when I showed up as something else, as the builder, not the supporter, she didn't have a category for it. So she tried to make me fit the one she had. That's not cruelty. It's just the limit of what a person can see from where they're standing. The thing about Adeline, about me, is that I didn't walk out of that dinner because I was brave. I walked out of it because I finally got honest about what would happen if I stayed silent. I had watched what silence cost Reese. A whole career, folded up and put away somewhere she couldn't find it anymore. I loved Reese. I didn't want to become her cautionary tale, and I didn't want her to become mine. Bex used to say that the work tells you who you are if you let it. She meant it as a joke, mostly. Something she'd say when we were both covered in flour at midnight trying to fix a sauce that wasn't coming together. But she was right. The work did tell me. It told me I was someone who showed up, who figured things out, who built systems that held. The Hargrove Group didn't call Hearth and Thread because of a brand. They called because of what I had proven over years that I could do. You can't manufacture that. You can only earn it, slowly, by refusing to take the shortcuts that would have made things easier in the short run. What C and I went through, those 4 months of therapy, those hard conversations, that was the most uncomfortable growing either of us had done in a long time. But discomfort is not the same as damage. Sometimes it's the opposite. He had to learn to hear his own voice, separate from his mother's. I had to learn that asking for what I needed wasn't a threat to the people I loved. Both of those things were true at the same time, and holding them together was the actual work of the marriage. I think the reason people respond to stories like this isn't because they want to see someone win. It's because they're sitting with their own version of that dinner table, their own fork on their own plate, and they're not sure yet what they're going to do. And maybe hearing that someone else stayed in the discomfort long enough to find out what was on the other side of it makes that moment feel a little more survivable. It is survivable. I promise you that. The lemon cake I made for Ren's birthday took me most of the night. I was tired and my feet hurt, and I could have ordered something. But I stood in that kitchen and I made it from scratch. Because that is what I do. That is who I am. And when she stood in front of it in her pajamas with her mouth open, I understood, again, the way you have to keep understanding things that matter, that nothing anyone tried to take from me could have given her that moment. You build what you build. You protect it. You keep going. That's the whole thing, really.